Story 1. When I was a child, both my parents went to work early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's to eat breakfast and go to school from there. My grandmother died during my junior year in high school, and I started coming straight home from school. During this time, my mother started complaining that when she got home from work, the receiver of the phone, a 1980s-style corded push-button phone, next to her bed was left off the base. I wasn't using the phone, but she would insist I must have because the phone was hung up properly when she left for work. One day, I got home a little early. Now, I need to pause and tell you about the layout of our apartment. From the front door, I looked directly into the living room, dining room, the door to the kitchen, and the short hallway that led to my parents' bedroom and my bedroom. There was no other door, the windows were old-fashioned narrow casement windows with screens, and we were on the third floor. Anyway, as soon as I walked in the door, I clearly heard 2 footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I dropped my school bag and foolishly ran to the bedroom. It wasn't far and took only a few seconds. I got to the bedroom, and no one was there. However, I immediately noticed that the receiver of the phone on my mother's bedside table was on the floor. It was placed so that the cord to the base was stretched out as far as it could go. I later tried to replicate the placement by shaking the table, tipping the phone, etc. I could never get the receiver off the base. When I finally resorted to knocking it off with a finger, it would fall on the table or next to it. The only way I could replicate the placement of the receiver where I found it was to carefully stretch the cord, place it, and hold it for a few moments. Could not have gotten to that spot by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up, and it immediately rang. I answered it, and it was my dad. He asked what was wrong. I asked him why he asked. He said he had called, apparently just before I got home, and someone, he thought it was me, answered the phone but never said anything. He finally hung up and had been trying to call back and only got through after I hung up the phone. I've never figured out what happened. I definitely heard footsteps, and I'm just as certain there was no one there. No one went by me. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff under the bed and in the closet for anyone bigger than an infant to hide in either spot. Also, after this, my mother never found the phone disturbed again. Story 2. I have seen some pretty wild stuff in my life, but most of it is explainable. The one event that comes to mind was witnessed by my dad, brother, and myself. It's a 2-part encounter, but I still consider it one event. It was around 1998. My family and I had just moved into an old clapboard house on the edge of town. It had a huge backyard with a 6-foot wooden privacy fence on one side and a metal chain link fence about 4.5 feet high around the other 3 sides of the yard. Neighbors were on one side, the privacy fence side. A small grass alley ran behind the back with a streetlight, and then there was another yard. Our bedroom was an old converted sunroom on the back of the house that faced the backyard. It had floor-to-ceiling windows all along the back wall looking into the backyard. We didn't have many options as to where to place our beds, so my headboard was against the windows, and my brother's bed was about 8 feet away with his headboard against the opposite wall, with the foot of the bed facing the windows. One night, we were up pretty late. I was in my bed, and he was in his, just talking about random things, when suddenly he got quiet. I figured he fell asleep, but then I heard him whispering in a shaky breath. So I'm like, "What?" And I hear him whisper again. So again I'm like, "Speak up, I can't hear you." And he goes, "Don't move, and be quiet," in a forced whisper. Thinking he's messing with me, I'm like, "Why?" I'm looking at him, and mind you, my head is to the windows and he's pointing into the backyard behind my bed. So I quickly sit up, turn around, and see this huge dog head staring almost nose to glass through the window right behind my bed. I'm almost nose to nose with this thing. Just a single pane of glass and about 10 inches of empty air separate me from this thing. Now, when I say I screamed, I mean I screamed. Not my proudest moment, but hey, I was like 10 years old. Well, anyways, the thing quickly ducked under the window, then ran to the side of the yard, jumped the 4.5-foot chain link fence, and bolted off into the darkness. My dad came running into the room with our mom right on his heels. We were able to get out that something was looking through our window. So Dad ran back to his room, grabbed his shotgun, and headed out the side door of the house into the backyard. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he didn't find anything, wrote it off as I had a nightmare, and my brother wouldn't admit to seeing anything. So I took the blame and was told to quit messing around and go back to bed. Well, later that night, maybe an hour or so, after I begged my parents to let me sleep in the living room because leaving the house wasn't an option and still being refused, I was made to sleep in my room. So again, my brother and I are in our room with these floor-to-ceiling windows. We are just completely rattled. We are both huddled in his bed, staring out the windows, when we see this thing come walking along the chain link fence on all fours, and the fence only comes up to its mid-shoulder, so this thing is huge. It sniffs the ground, does a few circles, and then hops the fence into the backyard like it's nothing. It walks over to the window and again gets nose to the glass like it's trying to see in. We are panicking the whole time. Well, my brother is like, this, and as soon as he steps off the bed, we hear this loud bang, and there is a flash of light. The thing at the windows gets knocked sideways, and without even missing a beat, it turns and runs across the full length of the backyard, jumps the back chain link fence, clears the fence and the alleyway, and then lands in the back neighbor's yard. This is easily a 15 to 20-foot jump minimum, clearing their fence like it was nothing and gone at a dead run, up beside that house and off into the darkness on the other side. My dad comes tearing around the side of the house with his shotgun in hand and makes a mad dash for the side door and slams it shut behind him. He is yelling that we have to go. We pack up and head to a hotel that night. My mom absolutely refused to believe we saw what we said we saw, and we only lived there for about 6 months. It rattled my dad so much he didn't even want to come back. He told my mom that we were just going to move the next day, but she wouldn't allow it. After about 6 months, she conceded and we moved. Mind you, this is in the coastal plains region of Texas. We have no large wild canines here. We have stray dogs and coyotes, but nothing that would even remotely touch on how big this thing was. My dad swears he shot that thing with a slug from about 15 feet away with his 12-gauge shotgun, right underneath its left arm, hitting it in the ribs where its vital organs are, and nothing. It just ran off. He said the thing that freaked him out the most was that when he saw the thing jump the fence, it walked towards our window crouched but still on its hind legs. It wasn't walking on all fours. And then when it got to our window, it stood up straighter, and he could tell that while it looked like a dog, its body was shaped wrong. He said it looked like a really stocky person wearing a dog suit, but he could tell it wasn't a suit. Also, when it was walking in circles sniffing the ground before coming into our yard the second time, it wasn't actually sniffing the ground like for a scent. It was staring at our window with its face to the ground like it was acting like it was sniffing the ground, almost as if it was playing a part to see if anyone would notice it. He said he's had dogs his whole life, and everything about what it was doing was wrong. A while later, I asked my dad why he was in the backyard if he thought I was having a nightmare, and he told me my brother is the one that gave it away. He said with how panicked I looked, that my brother was almost white as a sheet and wouldn't take his eyes off the window. He said, "Your brother has never looked so scared and never been one with just making stuff up." So after going back to his room with my mom, as he was laying there thinking about it, he decided that if my brother was as white as he was, then we had to have seen something. So he grabbed his gun in case he had to scare some creeper out of our yard and figured he was going to go through the garage and out by the far side of the house and sneak to the corner to see if someone was peeking in our windows or if someone was actually messing with us. He never actually thought we saw a huge dog-looking thing, just that maybe with it being dark outside and us being kids with overactive imaginations, we just mistook someone as something. But when he saw that thing come up the side fence, and with the streetlight in the back alley lighting up the backyard, he saw it and it freaked him out. He was going to creep back inside until it went up to our window, and he said as it stood up, he just got this instant feeling of dread, like something was going to happen to us. Story 3. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I could see the outline of someone standing there, but when I turned on the light, there was no one there. The door was still slowly closing, as if whoever or whatever had been there was leaving. Even creepier, my fire alarm had illuminated in the corridor, sensing movement, but there was nobody there. Still gives me chills thinking about it. Story 4. I was riding my bike down a rural road when I was 9 and found a garbage bag filled with red sludge and white sticks. I thought it was blood and bones, but I had a very sheltered childhood and I had never even seen pretend blood and bones, so I had nothing to compare to. I told myself it wasn't what I thought it was. After all, why would there be a ripped open garbage bag filled with blood and bones? 2 days later, I thought, look again, and if it is what you think it is, tell a grown-up. I biked back to the area and it was gone. I am now old and have watched enough to confirm it was blood and bones. Story 5. I've shared this story before, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it all the time, so I'll share it here. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. I never thought much of it until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15 or 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies, stuff like aliens, the paranormal, and lucid dreaming, so we talk about stuff like that a lot. He died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and that he could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real, and it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then a few years later, after I'd long forgotten about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral, he did get hit by a car and died, he was wearing all black like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there are parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy. I didn't tell anyone about it. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream, and I think, what if he never told me about it? It just left me with so many questions, but I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. Like there had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? Story 6. When I was 9 years old, I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section, and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights just at the bottom of the last uphill to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until the person got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close. But about halfway down the hill, the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out. Just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, then panicked and biked down to the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose, though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in the fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts, where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill, listening to the theme song from Ghostbusters and try to see the ghost. Story 7. About 25 years ago, my former wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both noticed that we always had that feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar, as if something was going to grab you as soon as you turned the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location on the clock face for the desired time. For example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process, and there is very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at 2 in the morning with old-school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, We saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. It scared me. I have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there, but the cellar feeling persisted.